Willits City Council meeting, regular meeting of November 10th to order. And as usual, we are doing this by teleconference pursuant to new rules and regulations, which we'll be talking about later. So would Kathy please lead us in the pledge to the flag and roll call?
Yes, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Council members Gonzalez.
Present.
Connie.
Here.
Stransky.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Present.
Mayor Strong.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to public communications, I believe Brian Bender would like to let us know that one of the items that is posted on our agenda is being pulled, and he's going to explain that. That's item 7A regarding the adoption of a initial study mitigated negative deck. So Brian, would you like to explain that?
Yes, Madam Mayor, City Council members. Yes, as you can see, that agenda item is on 7A. We are recognizing that there is significant public opposition and questions and concerns that have been raised regarding the proposal. In light of that, what staff is recommending to the council that the item is removed from any further consideration at this time, to allow us to repackage it without the inclusion of the Long 20 well component. That is the item that has generated a lot of concern among members of the public, and we feel that a lot of those comments are rightly so, and that would give us an opportunity to revisit the proposal and bring it back to the council without that component. So that's what we have at this time.
Thank you. And thank you, those of you who've commented and who came tonight to comment. You might want to stay with us because we have a couple of other interesting items. But since 7A is pulled off of the agenda, if you feel a need to say something, it will be now under the public communications because that item is now not on the agenda anymore. So with that, I am going to open the public communications. And as usual, we encourage people to address us on items that are not on the posted agenda. And you have up to 3 minutes. And we usually try to limit the total time that any particular topic takes, but we don't usually have to do that. So public comments, anybody on the items that are no longer on the agenda or that are not on the agenda? Yes, Devin Jones.
Good evening. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I have some issues with GoToMeeting sometimes with my computer. So thank you for informing us this evening of that item being pulled. One follow-up question, since there is quite a bit of interest amongst the agricultural community, would be, is there a proposed timeline for this agenda item to be coming back? Thank you.
Brian? Like
Mayor, Council, we're after discussing the item with staff, we're still looking at a timetable, but realistically, it's going to be in early 22, possibly at the February meeting.
Okay, and then anyone who has submitted comments would be notified when that agenda item comes up. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. Any other public comments at this time? I'm not hearing any. So on our agenda right now is Public Matters, which is a presentation by Sonoma Clean Power with a 2021 update. And I see Jeff Cyphers is here, and we can turn it over to you to present information about Sonoma Clean Power.
Thank you, Mayor Strong and council members. It's been 4.5 years since we started generating the electricity for Willits, and so it is high time for an update, and I apologize it's been so long. So let's not make it so long next time. So for those who aren't as familiar, SCP is the organization that Willits and the other cities and counties in Mendocino and Sonoma created to accelerate the construction of renewable energy and help us deal with climate crisis. And so we generate electricity from sources like hydropower, solar, wind, and geothermal. And we use that clean energy to help people try electric cars and begin to convert their homes to get rid of natural gas and do other things besides simply generating clean power. And so our customers and all of Willits still pays PG&E to deliver energy over PG&E's power lines, and that's historically about 2/3 of the total power bill. We represent about 1/3 or generate. And so our goal has been to deliver way better power for about the same price as PG&E, and so far that goal is working. So to date, we've saved customers in Willits a pretty small amount of money so far. It's about $90,000 in electric costs over those 4.5 years, and we want to do better. But the good news is, as part of delivering that tiny bit of financial savings, we've also delivered some really big greenhouse gas reductions and started some new customer incentives that I want to make sure folks are aware of. So since our launch, we've cut greenhouse gas emissions and electricity by more than 70% and have stayed far ahead of PG&E in solar, wind, and geothermal power. And one of the projects that we built early on, a solar power project that makes 70,000 kilowatts of new solar power, has been serving Willits from the very beginning. And we also have 50,000 kilowatts of power that runs day and night from the Geysers geothermal field just to your southeast. Also, over the last few years, we've built 46,000 kilowatts of wind power in the Livermore area to make sure we can get some clean energy in the evenings when the winds start blowing in California. And most recently, we started adding large-scale batteries to our solar power generators to help shift the power that those solar power generators are making into the evenings when we need it more even than in the middle of the day. And so nearby, in November 2019, a 1 megawatt solar power system was built just outside of Willits, and it's feeding clean power to about 300 homes that have signed up for our 100% locally produced, 100% renewable service called Evergreen. And it's part of a network of new solar power facilities around Mendocino and Sonoma counties that are linked with local geothermal power plants, also in Mendocino and Sonoma counties, that make power from clean renewable sources 24 hours every day. And that's one of the special things that I want to call attention to is we are the only electric provider we know of in the entire United States that makes clean renewable energy 24 hours every day. Every other provider is making a little bit extra, like from solar or wind, when sun is shining or the wind is blowing. And then they rely on natural gas or coal power when they're not producing, and then they net that out and get credit for calling that 100% renewable. So one of the things that I'm really proud of, and that I think Willits can be really proud of, is the people in your town who've signed up for Evergreen are really creating a model for the future of California's electric grid. And it's something that the state has said by law in 2046, every electric provider in the state has to be doing what we're doing with Evergreen. They have to be matching up renewable power all the time, every hour of every day, around the clock, even in the winter. And that's something that's already happening for the folks who've already signed up for Evergreen in Willits. So by utilizing solar power that's generated by our Willits solar facility and the other projects when the sun is out, and geothermal power and batteries when the sun is down. Evergreen nearly eliminates greenhouse gas emissions associated with homes or business electric use. And so that's exciting. And anyone who hasn't thought about this in Willits could sign up for that service by going to SonomaCleanPower.org and clicking on 100% renewable service. It does cost extra because this is 100% locally made, round the clock, renewable energy. So for a typical home, it costs anywhere from $10 to $25 more per month, and that's not cheap, and we know that. And so it's something we're really encouraging people who can afford it to try it. We're really encouraged that the County of Mendocino has already identified some budget for the entire county government accounts to go on to Evergreen. And that's exciting. And we also have a number of cities in Sonoma County that have already signed up for this. And what didn't happen overnight. Some of the cities like Rohnert Park just voted yesterday it was about 2 years in the making as they looked for the budget and thought about alternatives and really tried to figure out, is this the right investment? So 2 more thoughts before I turn it over and see if there's any questions. One is that on the cost front of energy, we've recently had some victories like getting PG&E to stop charging customers in Willits and throughout their territory for PG&E's regulatory fines. So when PG&E breaks the law, they get fined. Historically, they've been trying to charge ratepayers to pay for those fines. And just this year, we won a really key battle to get PG&E's shareholders to pay those fines. And in this latest case, we won $10 million of refunds for our customers. And I think, in the grand scheme of PG&E, that doesn't sound like a big number, and it's not. But I think it's one of the roles that we play, and it's something. It's an important thing for Willits to feel good about, but also to ask us to do when it's the right time. Is go to bat for ratepayers and make sure that we're not paying for things we shouldn't be. And I think the last update I'd share is that I really have to encourage people to go visit a website, and that's SCP for Sonoma Clean Power, AdvancedEnergyCenter.org. So it's SCP AdvancedEnergyCenter.org. And or you can come by Santa Rosa. I know it's a bit of a drive, but some of you get down here once in a while. To drop into our new Advanced Energy Center. And the thing that's incredible is we've got a 10,000 square foot building that we've fitted out where you can take classes in energy efficiency. You can try out cooking with super advanced induction stoves. You can get 0% interest financing on replacing your old air conditioner with a much more efficient model. You can get technical advice. You can come and talk about electric cars, anything that is really working toward eliminating your dependency on fossil fuels or cutting your electric bill or your energy bill. It's all fair game there. And so I really want to encourage people to take advantage of that. The website's pretty good, and it gives you some ideas, and the classes are all online, so you can watch videos of the classes that have already happened in the past, or you can sign up for new ones. Everything, all the classes are free, so there's no charge. And I think what I'll do is see if there's any questions about other things and not take more of your time, because I know everybody's busy. So, Mayor Strong, do you have any more questions or things that I should update people on?
Wow. Well, there was a lot in what you already said, and I was trying to take notes, but I hope you'll make that available in a press release and so forth so people can get all that data. Other questions from council members or things you'd like to hear more about? Anybody? Yes, Jerry?
Yes, Jeff, not sure exactly what I'm asking here, but is there anything we could tell our constituents regarding save money in some other way that's out there? You guys, just kind of spitballing here, but there's something we could be telling our constituents as far as saving money.
Yes. Yeah, I've got two quick thoughts. One is, if you haven't tried even test driving an electric car, a used or a new car, I really encourage people to do that. And here's why. They're super fun to drive. They're very fast and fun. So if you just want to drive for fun, they're fun. So you don't even have to care about the environment. They're fun. But here's the environmental part and the economic part. If you're driving on clean electricity made by Sonoma Clean Power, you're cutting emissions in an electric car by well over 90% compared to gasoline. And that's just massive. That's equivalent to like not having any natural gas use in your home at all ever. Just one car converted. The other thing is the cost of filling up your tank with evergreen 100% renewable electricity is about $2 a gallon equivalent. And I think you've probably all seen the gas prices lately. They're not $2 a gallon anymore. So, it used to be when gasoline was $3 a gallon and we were like $1.80 equivalent, it was a little bit of a closer match. But with gasoline getting close to $5 a gallon, and we're still around $2 equivalent, there's a pretty big cost savings from driving on electricity. And the big deal now is that the range of these cars, even the cars like the Nissan Leaf that have been priced at a better price point than some, has gotten really good. And so what used to be difficult for rural areas or for places where you had to do 100 miles of driving is now not such a big deal. When you've got 200 plus miles of range and you got a lot of quick chargers around, and we're putting in more in Mendocino, I think that's a real option. So I just want to encourage people to think about that, because the cost of owning an electric car is considerably lower than the gas car over the life of the car. And part of the reason for that is there's no transmission, there's no fuel pump, there's no, you never replace the brakes because it's all regenerative braking. Everything that goes wrong, there's no oil, there's no radiator. Everything that goes wrong with a gas car doesn't exist in an electric car. And so the typical maintenance on an electric car, and it's why the car companies have been so reluctant to promote them, is there's almost no maintenance. You got to rotate the tires, and then 5 years in, you got to do a few other checks. But in the first 3 to 4 years, it's rotating the tires. That's your maintenance. So I think it's one of those things that I think can be a real win for everyone.
You started by saying there were two things. One of them is get an electric vehicle. Was there another one that came to mind?
You're right. Thank you for prompting me. I got so wrapped up in electric cars. The other one is we've got toolboxes in your public libraries that have equipment in them and guides in English and Spanish to retrofitting your home and how to save money on your power bill. And they're free. You can check them out. And there's things in there that help you reduce your water use because we've partnered with your local water suppliers. And things in there that help you reduce your power use. So low flow shower heads, LED light bulbs, weather stripping. You can look for where your house is leaking air and figure out if you got some problems with your windows, that sort of thing. And it turns out that's one of the most popular items in the library system to check out, because people are getting, free equipment, but they're also getting an easy way to save 10 or 20 or 30 bucks off their power bill every month, and that's a popular thing because that keeps paying for itself. So thank you for reminding me there is a second item.
That's great. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Any other questions or comments from council members? Hearing none, how about any comments from the public? Devin?
I have a comment.
Oh, okay. Who is that?
That was the Willits Weekly. I'll wait for Devin.
Okay, Devin, go ahead, and then Mr. Kemeroff.
So just really quick, Jeff, following the drought and some of the situations, knowing that a lot of the portfolio for Sonoma Clean Power is based on recycled water and geothermal, I know there's been a big push to look at a couple things. One, as we've seen conservation, there's going to be less water available, in the treatment side of things. And then two, there's a big push to really look at purple pipe options and potentially deterring some of those water supplies, in the future from going to their current uses up at the geysers. So can you maybe explain a bit of your portfolio and where some of those additional sources may come from?
That is a spot-on question. So last month, knowing that the Western United States is not going to be in a better water situation anytime soon for any long period of time, this recent rain notwithstanding, our board launched a geothermal initiative that's a long game, and it's really focused on trying to dramatically cut the amount of water used in geothermal power from what we're seeing today in our local geysers complex. And we think there's very realistic savings of water that could be in the range of 50 to 60% for equivalent power production by going to some newer technologies that recapture the steam and condense it and re-inject it into the ground, essentially recycling that water instead of allowing it all to escape as steam. And so we've been really gearing up for I'm going to call it a 10-year initiative to build several hundred megawatts of new geothermal power in our kind of region, which would be reaching out to Lake County because they have a significant resource there, and focus on the water aspect. Not just the water aspect. We want to make sure that we're shrinking the footprint of facilities so they're not quite so large, making sure there's less seismic activity and lower air quality problems. But I think the water aspect is probably the biggest one. And so you've clearly got your finger on the right problem, which is access to water for power production is an issue. And I want to call out the biggest issue with access to water is actually in the natural gas power industry. And so what we're attempting to do is really shut down some of the natural gas power plants that consume water in what's called once-through cooling. So this is where they consume water one time and it's rejected into the environment because it's considered polluted or unrecoverable. And that is still a majority of the natural gas power plants in California. And it is a tremendously water-intensive industry, not to mention that the hydraulic fracturing process, sometimes called fracking, uses water and sometimes in ways that makes it difficult to recover or clean after that process. And so I think the connection between water and power is something that's really deeply important to us. And so that kind of answers your geothermal question. On the hydropower question, we're significantly cutting back on our reliance on hydropower, not because we think it's a bad resource, but because we think it's a risky resource. Our hydropower today comes from a mix of Pacific Northwest resources brought into California and resources inside California. But regardless, even though Oregon and Washington have more rainfall on average than we do, we saw last year that Portland can hit 116 degrees and not have a lot of rain, and we're not as confident that large-scale hydropower will be able to deliver year-round like it has in the past. So we are focusing more on things like wind and geothermal and solar power combined with batteries, and we think that those kinds of resources are going to make up probably more than 80% of our mix in the long run. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Great. Thank you. And then Bear Kamarov, you had a comment? Question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I had a question because the last time Sonoma Clean Power came to the city and spoke to the city council, the representative was explaining that, well, at the time, Sonoma Clean Power actually didn't generate any power at all, that they were, I guess you would call it a broker. They were able to purchase power from different sources, solar or wind, and that they, but now I hear you say that you are generating power and you have a solar facility, so I imagine things have really changed. Is that right?
So let me clarify how this works. So just like PG&E, we go out and we procure power, whether it's our own facility or whether it's a privately owned facility that we buy a contract from. And in the case of PG&E, they own somewhere around 30% of their power generation, and they buy the other 70% from merchant producers. Because we're a public agency, we're a government, and because we're only really buying renewable energy on any kind of long-term basis. We buy a tiny bit of natural gas power for our basic default sources, but it's always on a short-term basis because we never want to make a long-term commitment to fossil fuel. And because the federal government has said they're only going to offer tax credits to private companies to build renewable energy, and they're not going to give those tax credits to governments, it's made it so that structurally our ratepayers are at a huge disadvantage if we actually own the resource. And so the way we do it is we contract with private companies so that they own it and recoup the tax credit, pass on a significant chunk of that to our ratepayers. And then the reason why I say we produce the power, and maybe that was too easy a phrase, is that we often buy a 20-year contract that's absolutely exclusive to all output. And we're committed to paying those fees, and they're committed to delivering the energy, and neither one of us gets to back out of the deal. And so that is what enables the construction of the project. So without our contract, they wouldn't be able to build it. And so it's a good clarification to ask for, and I'm glad to be able to get a chance to make it. Thanks.
The complications of qualifying for tax credits. Yeah.
And it's something we fight for. So we're actually, I had a call with Congressman Thompson today to ask him to change the tax credit structure, and he's working on it so that public agencies could cash out tax credit equivalent. And the advantage of that is not just that we would own it, that special interest in owning something, but it's that our cost of borrowing money is around 3%, and a private company is probably up around 7 or 8%. So it means ratepayers save money. Because not only will we get the tax credit, but we'd be able to use public money to finance the project. And so I think there is a big long-term benefit if we can get that done.
Yeah. Okay. Good questions. Some good answers. Any other questions or comments from the public? Well, I want to thank Mr. Cyphers very much. This has been very interesting to me. I am going to become the alternate city rep. I'll announce that later in the meeting, but because I really appreciate what Sonoma Clean Power does. Exciting.
Thank you for having me here, and I'd love to come back sooner than 4.5 years from now.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So our next item on the agenda, and by the way, if anybody came in late, I want to let you know that item 7A, the negative declaration for groundwater proposal, is off of the agenda, and we're going to be repackaging that in a much smaller proposal, I think, probably coming back in February. So if you joined the meeting late, that is not going to be on our agenda today. Consent calendar. We do not have any ordinances to enact. Consent calendar is there are no minutes at this meeting, but we do have a resolution to extend for an additional 30 days the approval of continuing to meet virtually with the council and commissions and any other committee meetings, so that we are Brown Act compliant under the new procedure with the state. So that is the consent calendar item. Any questions? Any comments from the public? If not, I will entertain a motion. Jerry?
I'd like to move.
Okay. Moved by Councilmember Gonzalez. Someone like to second that?
I'll second the motion. This is Sabrina.
Okay, thank you, Sabrina. Moved and seconded. Kathy, would you do roll call?
Yes, Councilmembers Gonzalez,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Mayor Strong.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. We do not have any monthly activity reports this meeting. We are pulling item 7A. Are there any other, I guess no, that's would be like if we're meeting in with some other hat on. We're not. We are now at city manager report and recommendation. So this is where we will take up the potential adoption of our 2021-22 fiscal year budget. And I understand that Andy Heath has a PowerPoint to bring to us.
Yes, Mayor. We have Andy Heath held on rotation here. I will load him up. We also have, he has about an 18 to a 20 slide PowerPoint presentation that will cover kind of the highlights of the budget and specifically focus on general fund and some of the activities that amended the document since the budget workshop that took place before the council on October 25th. So, once again, I apologize. It's a late budget, and that is not an indication of the staff commitment. They put a lot of effort in this. We've been working internally on this since about April and May. It is a good document. It is a fair representation of what is the resources necessary to operate the city of Willits for the fiscal year 21-22. And it's my pleasure to present it, and hopefully we have Andy on the line.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Andy's here.
Great.
All yours, Andy.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Well, good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. For the record, Andy Heath, I'm the financial consultant to the city. What I'd like to do for you tonight is just go over what we've gone over a couple times once with the city council and again with the finance committee in a workshop and then a committee presentation, respectively. The proposed 21-22 budget for the current fiscal year that we're in, about 5 months into it so far. Before I actually go through the presentation, I just wanted to, again, as Brian mentioned, say thank you to staff for all the work that they've actually put into this. There have been various iterations of this budget, working closely with a lot of the staff to make sure the staff itself is correct in the budget, because it is the single largest expense on an ongoing basis, and then also the capital pieces of the budget as well. So thanks to all of the managers and department heads who helped put this budget together. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to kind of go over at a pretty high level some of the noteworthy things in the budget. As Brian mentioned also, there was a workshop on October 25th that went into a lot more detail of the budget itself. And what you see before you is really close to what was presented at the workshop with a few changes. And I've got a couple of slides that will go through what those changes are, just so for the council's purview. So I'm going to move on to slide number 2, just to kind of give you an overview of how I'll go through tonight's presentation. I'll give you an update on the overview of the budget development process to date. Then we'll look at the whole citywide budget, that is the whole citywide budget that includes all the funds of the city. We'll go over the overview of the changes to the budget, as I mentioned, since the budget workshop on October 25th. I'll give you an overview of the general fund, because the general fund is where the council has the most discretion to spend the discretionary revenues that come into the general fund and the programs that the general fund serves. We'll look at the city's enterprise funds, which are the airport, the water, and the wastewater fund. And then some selected special revenue funds, which for this case will be the sales tax transportation and capital projects fund, and then I'll go over a couple of the special police funds that are out there like we did last time, and then we'll open it up for any questions or directions the council may have before consideration of adoption of the budget. Slide number 3. So budget development process to date, what have we done? First thing we did was we looked at the fiscal 1920 and the 2021 financial activity, keeping in mind that both of those years have not been fully closed out yet because they're not audited. Okay, the 1920 financial activity is in the process of being audited, but it is not done yet. And most of the books have been closed out for that year, but again, because it's not audited, the numbers are not final. However, having said that, I'm fairly confident that the numbers that are presented in the budget that actually drive the fund balances from year to year, and more importantly, the fund balance to begin this year, fiscal 21-22, are going to be very close. So I don't expect that there will be a lot of audit changes that come out of fiscal 1920's audit, or for that matter, fiscal 2021's audit, that will impact fund balances to a great degree. So I just wanted to put that caveat out there that they are estimated fund balances at this point. We also met with department heads to obtain required baseline budget information for the current year, and spent a lot of time making sure that we were getting the staffing needs and requests correct. Presented the draft budget to the Finance Committee on October 20th, and then shortly after that, on October 25th, a couple weeks ago, we did have a budget workshop where the council had the opportunity to see the budget in pretty good detail and asked a lot of good questions and gave good direction for follow-up. And then, of course, tonight you're considering the proposed budget, and then once the audits start getting done, I would highly recommend that this budget come back to the council with those updates. And then also, just to give you an update on the activity, through the first half of the year, sometime at mid-year, February or so. Okay, moving on to slide number 4. So slide number 4 shows you what the citywide budget looks like. So when we talk about a budget, we typically talk about the appropriation authority or the spending authority that's granted by the budget. So if you look in the second column there, under expenditures, you can see that the total citywide expenditures that are being asked for from the council for spending authority for the year, fiscal 21-22, is about $20.7 million. So that's what your budget looks like. Having said that, you can see that we're only bringing in about $17.9 million in revenues. So why the big variance there? Essentially, that variance exists because you are using fund balances in special funds, particularly your enterprise funds, the water and wastewater, and your sales tax transportation fund, that have been carried over for capital purposes. So from year to year, You have large capital projects that are budgeted in those funds, and sometimes it's difficult to start those projects, so they carry over. And as a result of that carryover, you have carryover fund balance that hasn't been used. So when you look at the total capital, which is in the orange column all the way on the right-hand side of that slide, you see that the total capital is just under $6.4 million. So a pretty aggressive capital projects budget. There were some changes made since the workshop to the capital projects, and I'll go through those on another slide. But again, that's why you see revenues less than expenditures, because the expenditure budget of $20.7 million citywide assumes that you spend all of that. And assuming you'd spend all of that, you'll have about $13.5 million left in fund balance, as you can see in that second to the last column on the right, that will remain in the city's coffers. Focusing specifically on the general fund, you can see the general fund does have what's called a balanced budget, where revenues are at least what expenditures are, if not greater. $6.9 million in revenue, $6.7 million in expenditures. So you're hypothetically putting back into fund balance $155,000 or adding that at the end of the year if all of that comes to fruition. So the general fund is a balanced budget, and that is an important concept to keep in mind. Okay, next slide. Slide number 5 goes through all of the staffing that I mentioned. Was really looked at closely for this year in putting together the budget. You can see that there are 60.2 citywide positions that are budgeted. The 0.2 positions are essentially some part-time dispatch that is actually built into the budget to the extent that you need that extra dispatch help, so you put that 0.2 in there. These positions are fully budgeted in the budget, so there are 60 positions that are budgeted. I say that because the budget amount, that $20.7 million total citywide budget, includes a full year for all of these positions in the various funds that fund these positions. Furthermore, if you look over on the right-hand side of that slide, you'll see that there are approximately 16 positions that are vacant. I think there may be a couple of operators in water and wastewater that have been filled. So it may not be 5 right now, as I mentioned in that last bullet. But you do have a vacant finance director, a senior accountant, associate engineer, assistant city planner, cops grant police officer, dispatcher, maintenance worker in parks, and a few other positions as well that are vacant. To the extent those positions remain vacant, you're not going to spend the $20.7 million that is mentioned in the citywide budget, because you're going to have vacancy savings ultimately. So, as with any base budget, you have a fully loaded expenditure budget that gives you a good idea in a perfect world, in a perfect staffing situation, exactly what it would cost to fund all those positions. So that's the way that is set up. You also have parks and swimming pool staff that are built into the budget. They're all part-time folks because they work seasonally. Of these 60.2 positions, there are 12.92 FTE that are indirectly allocated from the general fund out to other funds. So positions like the city manager's position, the deputy city manager position, the finance director, many of those positions which really serve the city as a whole are actually partitioned out to cost-wise to other funds. And that aggregate total of everything, all those positions, it goes out as just under 13 positions. And then you have a couple positions that are not funded at this point in time. The utility superintendent position, and then you also have a new position that's been added as a not funded position, which is awaiting council discussion at some point in time in the future for a city clerk. One thing that was built into just the city clerk position. So one thing that was built into the budget was a reclassification of the existing deputy city manager / city clerk position to an assistant city manager position, and continue to do the city clerk positions until potentially a city clerk in and of themselves as a standalone position can be considered and potentially hired. So that, from my understanding, is subject to come back to the council for discussion. But the assistant city manager is built into the budget. The city clerk, although it's a position that's in the budget, it is not funded at this point in time. rounds out the positions in the citywide budget. Moving on to the next slide, slide 6. Capital projects. You can see here that there are just under $6.4 million in capital projects. This is kind of the high-level overview of the funds that have capital projects in them. You can see the general fund has a very small amount of capital for some tree trimming, parks equipment, fountain repairs, and some ball field paving. The enterprise funds have an array of capital projects that are all articulated in the individual budget sheets for those funds. One thing that did change is the capital projects fund, noted there at the bottom. You now have about just under $1.7 million in capital projects in the capital projects fund. Capital projects fund projects are projects that are funded by things like grants or other ancillary sources, or potentially transfers from other funds. The goal for any capital projects fund is to be an in and out fund and to always have a zero balance at the end of the day, so that the funding sources in their entirety support the project costs in their entirety. Some of the things that have been added to the capital projects fund are some general plan, and this is subject to the workshop that we had a couple of weeks ago. General plan and sphere of influence updates have been added in, some flood mapping, a financial system upgrade, which is already there. We also have some city hall renovations that have been added in, and citywide email and IT upgrades that have been added in since the budget workshop. Most of these projects, like the financial system upgrade, city hall renovations, citywide email and IT upgrades, are funded by the general fund and the city's two main enterprises, the water and wastewater fund, which all benefit greatly from the administrative components of these projects. So those have all been added in, and the numbers that you see in the citywide budget reflect that. Okay, next slide. So we can get down and kind of into the nitty-gritty on what has changed since the budget workshop in the 21-22 proposed budget. Updates to the budget include in the general fund some increased contractual costs for the Page landfill, about $5,000 now. Removal of $32,000 in engineering costs that were previously in the general fund that had already been allocated out to other funds. So those were actually inadvertently double counted, and the general fund saw a decrease of those costs because they were double counted there. So training costs for code enforcement, $800 there. In addition of some county fees for cannabis compliance, $1,450. Addition of $1,500 in office equipment for a new position that has been added in the planning division department for an office assistant 3, and that's just some office equipment for them, $1,500. Addition of $10,000 includes field operations to fix a damaged vehicle that was not covered by insurance. So this vehicle ended up not being totaled, and it needs to be essentially fixed. So it's going to cost about $10,000, and we'll work with the staff to add that into the budget as well. In the sales tax transportation fund, we increased the pavement preservation project by $100,000 there. I think we took $200,000 out of sales tax transportation, and that was just consistent with CIP requirements. So sales tax transportation fund has a considerably healthy fund balance, and we'll have no issues funding this additional $100,000. Wastewater fund, an addition of $35,000 for a needed rate study, and you see the same thing in the water fund for the rate study there. Those should be done every few years just to make sure that you are collecting the fees that are necessary to support the ongoing operations of each of those enterprises, and more importantly, any necessary capital that may be required consistent with permit requirements that are required by the state. Also in the water fund, you have an addition of $40,000 for Wall Water Pump, VFT project, and that's just moving those funds from the SCADA project. So it's not an addition, it's just a shift. And then an addition of $1,800 for clothing and safety supplies to provide for labor MOU requirements. That were built into the labor agreement. On the next slide, you see a continuation of the changes. In the capital projects fund, I mentioned a couple of these already, but we did increase the pavement preservation appropriation by $100,000 there as well, and that is funded by local partnership funding. So you'll see a commensurate increase on the revenue side for that. Addition of $80,000 City Hall renovation project funded by the general fund at $25,000, and then the water and wastewater funds at $27,500 each. Addition of $50,000 for citywide email and IT upgrade funded by the general fund and the water and wastewater funds. You can see the amounts there. $177,952 in parks projects funded by a Proposition 68 grant. Addition of $260,365 appropriation for sphere of influence and land use element update, funded by a few grants, the LEAP grant, SB2 planning grant, and the RACP grants that all need to be used for planning activities. And then an addition of $27,000 for local roads and safety plan update project funded by the Caltrans grant. And again, as I mentioned, something that's not yet included in the budget is the funding for the city clerk position, subsequent to the reclassification of the deputy city manager / city clerk to the to an assistant city manager. And ultimately, however, once that city clerk position is funded, it's not 100% general fund cost. It will be also offset out to other funds consistent with the activities that that city clerk does. Okay, moving on to slide 9. You can see the general fund and what the general fund looks like for fiscal 21-22. In that first column there, that's where we believe the fiscal 2021 budget that year just finished will end the year. So you can see there that we anticipate the city will collect just under $6.1 million, or has collected just under $6.1 million in revenue. And it's spent $5.6 million in expenditures, leading to a surplus or an addition to fund balance for that year of just over $450,000. Main reason there is we had a pretty low revenue budget that was anticipated for fiscal 2021 because of COVID. When we put the budget together last year, had no idea where COVID was going to go and where it was going to take the city from an economic perspective, and how it was going to impact the city's sales taxes and other taxes closely tied to the economic activity. As it turns out, it wasn't as bad as expected. Sales taxes continue to come in. Measure K actually started in fiscal 2021, where you have 1/4 of Measure K that was accrued, and it accrued significantly higher than what was anticipated, which was about $150,000 more. TOT came in higher, sales tax came in higher. So those all added to the additional revenue that came in. And because we were in a COVID environment, the city was restrained in its spending. So we didn't spend a whole lot of money, and spend about $5.6 million, and that's what leads you to that surplus of $450,000. When you look individually at the fiscal 21-22 proposed budget, the revenue budget is $6.9 million, the expenditure budget is $6.7, and you have about $155,000 projected to be added back to fund balance for that year as well. Between 2021 and 21-22, you can see the differences in the budgets on the revenue and expenditure side. We have about $830,000 more in revenue. All of that can be attributed to Measure K, because instead of 1/4 of Measure K in 2021, you're going to get 4/4 of Measure K in 21-22. And this is money that is hitting the bank and has been coming in on a regular basis. Also, you have very diminished effects of COVID on the sales tax and TOT, and that will come back to you. That's where that $6.9 million is coming from. On the expenditure side, you see a significant increase in expenditures from what was incurred in 2021 by about $1.1 million to $6.75 million in 21-22. That $1 million increase is highly due to the fact that all positions are budgeted for the entirety of the year. So where you have had a finance director, a planning position, other parks positions, and other positions funded by the general fund that have been vacant for the first 4.5 months of the year, you're going to see that vacancy savings. So that $1 million, $1.1 million, or the $6.7 million proposed expenditures is likely not to hit that high, just because you already have vacancy savings for the year. So the $155,000 surplus is probably going to be a little bit more to the extent you have that vacancy savings. Some of the other expenditures that I wanted to mention are you have a true up the base budget operational costs of things, costs for like legal things, legal activity, insurance, CalPERS unfunded liability. All those are built in at either their base level or the level that we know we will be paying for them. And then any approved salary increases, which I believe are met, have been built in as well. Have not been built in because there are no salary increases that have been approved by the council at this point. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Again, this just continues the general fund overview. So when you look at the revenues, $6.9 million in revenue, you can see that the vast majority of those revenues accrue from taxes, things like property tax, transient occupancy tax, sales tax, and such. Just over 73% of all the revenue that comes into the city are from those taxes, which in large part are driven by what's going on in the economy. So you can see how a pandemic like COVID, and really not knowing a lot about COVID when it first came out, could have a detrimental effect, or a perceived detrimental effect on taxes, because we thought things were going to go get really bad because we had to shut everything down. So thankfully that didn't happen to the extent we thought it would, and that's good because 73% of your revenue base comes from those taxes. On the next slide, you see a similar pie chart for the expenditure appropriations of $6.75 million. And you can see, like most cities across the country, the largest part of any municipal budget will go to a police department to the extent you have a police department. So just under 40% of all the appropriations for the general fund accrue to the police department. And then you can see the second largest piece of that pie is the light, the medium pink one, that is the CalPERS UAL for $731,000. I mentioned this at the budget workshop. I'll mention it again because I think it's an important consideration that the city should look to in the coming fiscal year as audits are completed. And that is to look at potentially refinancing, refunding, rethinking how the CalPERS unfunded liability is paid for, with all of the volatility associated with how CalPERS calculates its unfunded liability, and ultimately the interest rate it earns on its portfolio. Had a great year last year. It earned over 21%, which is 3 times the discount rate used to compute the UAL. But that will not happen every year. And in some years, they will not make the 7% or the 6.5% discount rate that it will likely drop to, because they made so much money last year in the future. So we really need to think about potentially bonding that and getting that payment that's made on an annual basis, which continues to rise year after year, fixed at a fixed interest rate, and to really enable the city to better control its budget and actually what is paid for future pension costs. So that's something that I recommend the city look to in the future budgetarily. Okay, moving on to the next slide, which is the last slide for the general fund. Just kind of puts everything in perspective on what is going on in the general fund over the last couple of years. So you can see in fiscal 18-19, we actually did have a deficit in the general fund where reserves were used to the extent of $477,000. At the end of that year, there was $2.46 million in reserves, which represented about 46.7% of all the expenditures for that year. So it's a prudent amount. 46% of your expenditure budget being held in reserves is a good amount for a city your size. But in 1920 and again in 2021, you can see that we anticipate surpluses based on the activity that has been generated in the general fund of $293,000 and $452,000 respectively. So at the end of 2021, your reserves are likely to be about $3.2 million in the general fund, which represents about 57% of the expenditure base for fiscal 2021. And you see in 21-22, there's that $155,000 surplus, taking your reserves to about $3.3 million. And you can see your general fund coverage drops to just about 50%. And that's because you have a higher level of expenditures that are being used to do the denominator in that equation. Because again, you have a fully loaded expenditure budget that's being calculated to come up with that percentage of general fund expenditures and fund balance. So, but again, 50%, great number. The budget's looking good, at least for the general fund and citywide. Okay, moving on, let's talk about the city's free enterprise funds. First of all, the airport fund. Can everybody still hear me? I want to make sure, but I'm doing a lot of talking. Am I still on?
And you're doing fine. Perfect.
Okay, good. I want to make sure. I always get nervous when I'm on these calls, so. Okay.
We would have warned you long ago if we couldn't hear you.
I know, but I still get nervous. So, okay. For the airport fund, you can see here that what I've done is shown you exactly what the 18-19 actuals were, the 19-20 preliminary actual, the 2021 mid-year, 2021 estimated, where we likely ended up in 2021, and then the proposed budget. So. The proposed budget for the airport, $308,600 in revenue, $311,000 in expenditures. So using a little bit of fund balance, which at the end of the year will likely be about $136,000. So not too big of a deal there. Some of the notes that I have for the airport fund is the city did actually receive last fiscal year in 2021 $74,500. For the fire staging that was done related to the fires that occurred up in that area. So we were paid by the state for that, so that's good. Also, there is some CARES Act money that is expected to be received in 21-22 and has been built into the budget as such, and the proposed budget for $30,000. And that can be used for any airport operational purpose. And then there is a project that's built in for an airport improvement project, or otherwise known as AIP, about $191,000 that is expected to be mostly reimbursed, about 95% by the FAA for this current year. Pretty simple fund there. On the next slide, slide 14, the wastewater fund. I'm just going to focus on the 21-22 proposed budget. So $3.4 million in revenue, offset by $4.3 million in expenditures. So you can see in this fund, in the wastewater fund, you're using about $1,945,000 in fund balance for the fully loaded capital projects budget. Keeping in mind, the capital project budget for the city's wastewater fund is $964,000. So it assumes that all of that is spent in that $4.3 million. If you do spend all that on capital, you will still have about $3.4 million in working capital or fund balance at the end of the year, which is a healthy amount. Staff charges include 6 directly charged positions, and 4.3 of those positions that I talked about earlier that are variably charged as costs in this fund. The base rate increases are not anticipated they're not going to happen for fiscal 21-22. However, as I mentioned earlier, one thing we did add to the budget between the workshop and now is a rate study for both this fund and the water fund. So, again, you want to make sure that you're charging the fees you need to charge to make sure you continue to keep these funds sustainable long term. And then you have operating margin, operating margin is when you look at the ongoing revenue sources, which for these funds would just be the rate base plus any interest or other ongoing things that you get every year, and you subtract the core operating expenses that don't include capital. You have an amount. You should have an amount that's a positive number. Otherwise, you have an unsustainable enterprise. That positive number represents what's known as operating margin, and your operating margin for the wastewater fund for fiscal 21-22 is about $84,000, which is a little low, which is why the outcome of the wastewater fund rate study will be necessary to really look at how we move forward budgetarily with that fund. The water fund is on the next slide, slide 15. You can see there, you have just over $3 million revenue base. Most of that is related to rates. And then your expenditure base is $4.6 million. And of that $4.6 million, keep in mind that just under $2.1 million is related to capital. So assuming you do all that capital and spend the $4.6 million, you will use about $1.6 million in your working capital or fund balance and end the year with about just under $2.9 million in fund balance. The water fund, however, has a much higher operating margin, about $540,000. So that is a healthy margin. And if you didn't have all that capital built in, you would definitely be having surpluses in your water fund. The water fund also includes 6 directly charged positions and 4.68 variably charged positions. And again, we are doing a rate study for that fund, and there are no increases built in for the current year. On the next slide, slide 16, you have the sales tax transportation fund, $1.7 million in revenue. Is offset by just under $2 million in expenditures, so you're using just under $250,000 of your working capital for that year. In the transportation fund, which basically pays for all things transportation and has a very large array of capital associated with it, you have $1.34 million in capital. So of that $1.9 million in total appropriations, 1.3 of that 1.9 is all for capital. So very sustainable fund used for transportation. At the end of the day, you will have about $2.4 million left in that fund. So again, very healthy fund balance in that fund as well for future transportation needs. There are 2.69 variably charged positions that come into this fund. So it's a pretty low staff number. And I mention that because the third bullet down talks about the gas tax fund and the potential need to move some staff costs. Subject to some more discussion and review of exactly what's being charged to those funds, but moving the staff from the gas tax fund into the transportation fund on an ongoing basis. The gas tax fund simply doesn't have the ongoing revenue base to support a lot of the staff activities that are in there right now. And then you also have a maintenance of effort requirement that's being reviewed related to the RMRA or the SB1 money that the city currently receives for specific road activities, so and road capital. All that's being looked at right now. Just put that bullet there as a caveat, but with a healthy fund balance and with a pretty good margin in that fund, it can definitely accommodate nexus-based expenditures associated with staff that relate to transportation. So that, and then just the other bullet says that this typically includes street maintenance and storm drain maintenance programs. So good fun there. On the next slide, slide 17, you can see I just again mentioned that the appropriations that have been earmarked in 5 special funds related to the police department. Each of these funds collects fees and or charges and or monies that come in from the state for something specific and must be used for police-related activities. So the police chief has actually built in appropriations in 4 of 5 of these funds to $44,000 in the narcotics forfeiture fund, $35,000 in each of the DNA cost reimbursement and health and safety restitution fund, and then another $5,600 in the law enforcement administrative fund. All of these appropriations are for police-related activities, and there still will be some fund balance in these funds at the end of the day, even if these are used. But typically, you would use these for one-time purposes to help supplant costs that would otherwise be borne by the city's general fund. And on the next slide is questions and potential approval of the proposed budget. So I will stop there, and I'm sure staff is available, Brian's available to answer any specific questions that the council might have, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor Strong. You there?
Madge, she's talking
Hello?
to you.
Oh, okay.
Madge is talking to you. You're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself
There we go.
so I wouldn't have background noise, and now I forgot. Yes, I see. Was Greta just indicating that I was muted? Okay. Thank you. And I apologize. Okay, so I had one very minor comment myself, but let's open it up to any questions or comments from council members, and I see Greta's hand.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much for this presentation. One question for you. You mentioned that no raises had yet been approved by the council, so there were no salary increases included in the budget. However, we did approve raises for IBEW and the POA, so are those included?
Yeah, so if those were effective, I should have corrected that. If those were effective July 1st, which I believe they were, they are actually in the budget. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay, I wondered about that also. Any other comments or questions from council members? My one is fairly minor thing, but I noticed on the City Hall renovation capital costs that you have it split with, I think, 27. Anyway, higher percentages were going to the sewer and water enterprise funds than from the general fund. And what I thought we should know is that the staff that work in that office have different allocations to those different funds. But it seems to me that that seemed a little bit high of how much was being allocated to those enterprise funds, given.
Yeah. That's a really good observation, and the rationale behind those allocations has to do with where the renovations are proposed to be made to the City Hall area, and the functions of that area in City Hall that will be renovated. A lot of that area is used as like counter space, and is used as where the public comes in and does a lot of payments for utilities, where they actually, pay for water and sewer, and a lot of the water and sewer activity, the bill payment, the money that comes in, the checks that are processed, etc. All of that happens in the area that is going to be renovated. So that's why I added a little bit more for those functions in that area. But we can certainly look at an assessment once it's determined exactly what the renovations are going to be, and make sure that it's done correctly, because it needs to be done correctly.
The water billing does happen there, but the sewage is not handled there, I don't believe. So, wastewater.
It is processed there.
Okay, but it's not like it's not a lot of public involvement, is there?
No, I mean, the way we bill on an annual basis, but, there is still daily correspondence that we deal with the public on, managing their billing, their accounts. We meet with staff here when we have to identify projects. So that is basically the hub of the utility management, other than the field operations.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure it was reasonably fair in terms of allocations.
Well, I believe, I think Andy's response was spot on. Andy and I talked about it in some detail, and we walked him through the proposed renovations, and he got a pretty good understanding of what we're asking to do with that space and how it's going to accommodate specifically the enterprise fund activity of water and wastewater.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no other questions or comments from council members, I see Sabrina, did you have one? No? Okay. I just saw your picture come up. So any comments from the public on this proposed... Oh, Greta, I see your hand. Yes.
I'm sorry, I just remembered I had one more question for you, Andy. Brian had mentioned in the last couple of meetings that the county is going to be switching over their IT software and will no longer be on the county plan. Did we include that expense in this budget as well? We did? Okay, thank you. I see Brian nodding. I'm good.
Okay, great.
Okay. So opening it up to any public questions or comments. All right, I'm not hearing any. So it's back up here to the council members, up as if we had a dais. And I know that Brian is very eager to have a budget to refer to. So I hope we're ready to move ahead. Would anyone like, yeah, Jerry? I see Jerry and Greta's both hands up. Jerry. I saw your hand first. Can you unmute yourself?
I apologize. I will make the motion to adopt the fiscal year 2021-22 budget as presented. Andy is doing this, and with the exception of a couple of the changes that will have to happen on the date, I'm confident.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Gonzalez. Greta, did you have your hand? Yes.
I would like to second that motion.
Okay, moved and seconded. As I think Andy has pointed out, and we're aware that there will undoubtedly be some budget amendments as we get through the year. And so sometime after the beginning of 2022, we will have a review of how we're doing against that budget and look at any changes that we need to make. And in the meantime, we have a motion and a second. So, Kathy, please do the roll call.
Yes, thank you. Council members Gonzalez.
Did we open it?
What?
Did we open it up to the public?
I did.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Council members Gonzalez,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes, and I'd just like to remind council that both Councilman Larry Stransky and I had both requested at a later date that we discuss potential for a budget amendment for tree, more funds to take care of our trees in the community. So just wanted to throw that out there that I'm voting in favor of this, but don't want that forgotten. Thank you.
thank you. Mayor Strong,
Yes,
thank you.
that is a major accomplishment to finally get that budget through. And it never stops, but we do have to have a benchmark work from, and now we do. So we are with the other item on city manager. Any other reports, Brian?
Believe it or not, I didn't have anything prepared. I figured we would be still going pretty deeply with the groundwater project, so I didn't want to plan anything. But, you know, I just want to take the opportunity, like I said in my earlier comments, that Andy was amazing. I just wish he was permanent here. I learned so much from that man, and I know that staff does as well. You know, California's lost to Tennessee gain to a certain degree. And once again, I want to commend the effort of staff, and they put a lot of diligent effort into this document. They are confident in it, and we are going to move forward. There's definitely going to be some adjustments as the year unfolds. And also, I just like to extend my gratitude to the council in recognizing trust you have in staff and myself to implement this budget. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We are moving to item 9A. It's a discussion possible action to award a contract to Wonderware, California, for an amount not to exceed $52,662.50 to upgrade the SCADA hardware for the water system. And I have here that Scott Herman is going to be presenting that. Is Scott available?
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and council members. What you have before you is It's a discussion and possible action to adopt resolution awarding a contract to Wonderware not to exceed 51,662.50.
52.
662.50, yeah.
It says 52,000.
Now that was the amended one was sent out. So it should
Okay, I'm
reflect
sorry. Okay.
51,662.
That was my error. I had the wrong numbers. The correct number is on the amended resolution. So it was actually less than what was originally posted.
Okay, I printed out the previous, I guess. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's all right. So an overview of the SCADA system. It's a supervisory control and data acquisition system, which is basically the brains of the plant. If we lose that, that system goes down. You're running the plant by hand, which is obviously not ideal. But when the plant received upgrades in 2015, we were still on the old manual controls at that plant, and at the time, the engineer that designed this project actually selected Wonderware as a software to control the plant. It's been around a while. They're local. They're out of Healdsburg, and essentially, what they stated when it was installed in 2015 that you have usually the lifespan is usually 5 to 7 years before you start experiencing some hiccups in it, and so we're in year 6 now, and it's time to upgrade before I guess preventative maintenance before it does go down. So in addition to upgrading the equipment, this project, we also have a backup SCADA system. This will fully integrate the backup SCADA system. If one of the hard drives on the main system goes down, we can go upstairs and actually run the plant as a backup. So it's a critical infrastructure piece that needs to be taken care of. We started back in February with Wonderware, drumming up this quote to get it to council by July for the original budget. So we've been through probably 4 or 5 different quotes because they're only good for 30 days. So it's obviously gone up in price a little bit. I believe it was $46,000 the first time. It's jumped, about $5,000 in the meantime. So, the recommended action is to adopt a resolution awarding a contract to Wonderware to upgrade the system, the SCADA hardware, and its actions consistent and describe facility improvements. So I guess that's, if you guys have any questions on how it works or anything else, I'm here to answer.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I see Jerry's hand up. Go ahead.
A question for Scott. Wonderware, how long have they been around, and for some reason they ceased to exist or were bought out? We have to go a totally different system. Just curious, longevity-wise. I've bought software in the past where it disappeared after a while, so just curious.
Yeah, I don't know the inception of them, but I know that they're very robust. They're worldwide. They do constant trainings in their San Francisco area for for integrators or operators that want to learn how to integrate. But I don't know when the inception of California Wonderware was.
But they also did the original installation about 6 years ago?
Correct. Yep, 2015.
Thank you.
I like to respond as well. From past experience, I've worked on projects where we were updating SCADA systems, and there was an actual a buyout from the one company to the other, and they essentially just accepted the transfer of intellectual property rights associated with the one software to another. The essential code element of that software is pretty standard, and they're willing to, usually they're just buying the interest of the of the corporation and not the intellectual software that is associated with the product. So I don't have any concerns that if there is a transfer in ownership, that they will still provide the service and backup that we need.
I'd just like to add that, they are a local area, so they've been very good to us in support. One of the main guys lives in Cloverdale, too, and he's always been available. So, it's a proprietary software, so they're the only ones that can, upgrade the system.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council members before I open it up? Any questions or comments from the public? And I am not hearing any. So it's back to our council if we would like to have a motion and a second. Greta?
I move to to adopt a resolution awarding a contract to Wonderware California, not to exceed $51,662.50.
I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. No further discussion. Kathy, would you please do roll?
Yes, thank you. Council members Gonzalez,
Yes.
Tawny,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Mayor Strong.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Council, for your support.
Well, it's very important to have that automated system in the water department. It's wonderful. So we do not have actual written department reports this time in our packet. But if there are any reports any departments would like to make, this is your chance to do that.
Actually, Mayor, we talked about it at our staff meeting. No one was really prepared, so if anyone who's actually on the call or on the meeting wants to give a verbal update, that's so be it. But we're looking at maybe doubling up in December. It shouldn't have been placed on the agenda. Sorry.
Okay. That's all right. No problem.
Everyone's happy and working hard. That's the update.
Okay. All right. So City Council announcements, communications, reports. There's one item that's on here that I had gotten this information from the League of California Cities, kind of in response to a workshop that we had near the beginning of this year with the council members to look at a rotating system for the mayorship instead of doing it basically sort of from scratch once a year. This would put it on a rotation where they would kind of share the mayorship from year to year. The particular example that's in the agenda packet makes it sort of as if it's like a ordinance or what's the word, like a rule that you do it this way. But I think having it be a guideline is what we're looking for. So it's essentially would, if there are any council members who want to opt out, obviously they can do that. But that as a general rule, that the longevity of having served on the council is the first guideline, and we just share this from year to year so that over the course of 5 years, everybody has had a chance at it. So I wanted to bring that up to the whole council before our December meeting, because that's when we decide the mayorship and the vice mayorship for the following year. So I'm opening it up for council members to comment or discuss.
This is Larry. What's the procession line in this now if we adopt this?
I believe in terms of the actual people, Larry, you would be the next in the rotation, and then it would be Sabrina, and then it would be Greta. So that would be according to the guidelines here.
And I've told everybody that I don't want anything, so it's Sabrina then.
Matt,
Yes.
if it goes from top to bottom, I think the order is Larry, yourself, Jerry, myself, and then Greta. If the way the document reads is it goes in order from top to bottom.
I guess I was assuming that since both Jerry and I have served as mayor in the last 2 years, that we would go to the bottom of the rotation, but that's up to us to decide.
Right, so if we approved it though, then it would go by whatever document we approve is all I'm saying.
Okay, well, as I was saying, I don't think this should be written as a mandatory, it must be done this way. I would say informally that since Jerry and I have both been mayors recently, that it would make sense to have the other council members have their shot at it first. But maybe Jim did you have a comment on that, Jim?
I just wanted to say that this whole issue of the selection of the annually of the mayor and vice mayor is part of our rules of procedure. In 2017, the council adopted the manual procedures and protocols, and on page 16, there is the discussion of how that's done, the way that we presently do it and have done it in recent years. And so I would suggest, if it's the council's will to adopt a new system, such as the one you are outlining, that we do an addendum to our procedures, or perhaps in 2022, we look at revising our procedures. It will have been 5 years since they were last adopted. There may be other things that need revision as well.
Okay. Other comments? I'm hearing none. So do we want to just sort of bear this in mind for this coming December meeting without adopting it as a policy? And then, as Jim has suggested, we might look at the policies and procedures to be updated sometime in 2022 so that it's more codified, but still a guideline.
I think that's a really good idea. Thank you, Madge.
Okay. All right. Then Greta?
I was just going to say, I feel like we kind of have been doing this already. I mean, it seems like just naturally it progresses from one council member to the next. And I do think that the original conversation was just to try to take out some of the maybe hurt feelings if somebody's nominated before someone else gets a chance to be nominated who wanted to be nominated. So, it seems a little bit of a moot point to me, but I guess it would be good to review those policies, those procedures next year, and kind of make sure that if there's anything that we're uncomfortable with, we can tighten it up.
Well, I think I've been the longest serving on the council right now, and there have been a number of years where we had the same mayor year after year, and there's been a couple times where it was very awkward as to who jumped in first with their nomination of who would be mayor. And, I like the idea of taking some of the personalities out of the equation and just saying everybody gets a turn at it. And that's, by the way, a lot of cities do that. The county board of supervisors does that. And so, obviously a council member that doesn't want to take on that role can opt out, even, it's a little extra work, and it isn't necessarily being rewarded in any other way. Sometimes it's a thankless job, but I think it's fair to have a guideline that puts it on a rotation rather than just sort of who jumps in to make the nomination. Okay. So, other reports from council members, I have a couple. Any other meetings you've been to that you want to report on? Jerry?
I just want to say I did the LAPCO earlier in the month, and the thing that was on there was the Iowa Valley Fire District annexing part of city of Ukiah for a fire. And then we had a protest hearing on this past Monday, and there were not enough protest letters to meet the threshold. So, again, the rules were kind of set forth, and there has to be a lot of folks protesting. They apparently count landowners as well as registered voters, and I'm not sure if the press reported on it yet or not, but so basically the city of Ukiah will be getting out of the fire department business and Ukiah Valley Fire District. The big issue had to do with some of the folks in the city of Ukiah would want an additional tax burden that part of the district had voted in. Some sort of truing up later on. So that was, I think, waiting on the League of Cities is supposed to be an appointment of going to be on the public safety. And I'm pretty sure I'll be picked for this meeting. That's
Okay, thank you. Greta, do you have any reports?
Yes, I attended the MCOG meeting last Monday. The big news there is that the staff presented the draft 2022 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. It is available for the public to comment on the MCOG website. Comments are encouraged by November 22nd of this year. That way they can integrate the comments into the final plan. It's actually pretty cool, so anybody who wants to look at it is encouraged to do so, council members included. You'll find some good stuff happening in our region, or planned for our region. And then the other thing that I wanted to report out is that Caltrans announced that they are having a, what did they call it, large item amnesty day this month. So if you have some major piece of equipment that you need to dispose of, you can do that with no cost, something like on the roadside kind of a thing. So call Caltrans if you have questions. They're having this amnesty day to help with roadside cleanup. And then they also reported to me that they are going to be, as of last week, they were going to be hitting the Highway 20 section between Willits and Fort Bragg for roadside cleanup. And I was pushing them to do the same for the section of Highway 20 from the intersection of Main Street and Highway 20 to the highway. That section south of town has gotten pretty badly littered, and so they are going to try to get crews out on that as well. And that's it for MCOG.
Thank you. That's great. Sabrina?
Anyone else just feel it? Wait.
Oh.
Earthquake.
Yeah, I felt that.
Yeah. I didn't feel it.
I didn't either.
I don't know why. MTA has not met publicly since we had our last meeting. The Arts Committee may be having a special meeting before a future item is placed on the agenda. And I think that's all I have to report. The other meetings were just finance meetings, and that's already been reported about this evening.
Oh, Larry?
I don't have anything.
Okay.